Think you know everything about Tupac's breakout film? Think again. From chair-throwing auditions to mysterious twin guns, from a 27-year-old playing a teenager to studios wanting it as a comedy, choose. Hide's bizarre secrets that will change how you see this hood classic. The wildest stories happened behind the camera, where pranks led to fistfights and a rap legend was born through pure accident. Fact 1. Tupac got the role by crashing someone else's audition. Tupac Shakur's legendary performance as Bishop in Juice almost never happened. And it all came down to being in the right place at the right time with the right attitude. The future rap icon wasn't on any casting director's list, hadn't submitted a headshot, and wasn't even looking for acting work when he landed the role that would launch his film career. The whole thing started when Money B from Digital Underground got called in to audition for one of the main characters. Tupac was hanging out with the Digital Underground crew at the time, and when Money B headed to the casting office, Tupac decided to tag along for the ride. He had no intention of auditioning himself, and was probably just killing time while his friend went through the process. But once Tupac got inside that casting office, something clicked. According to casting director Jockey Brown, Tupac simply walked into his office and asked if he could audition for the part. Brown remembered that Tupac was all over the place during his reading. But there was something magnetic about his energy that caught everyone's attention. The young rapper had actually trained as an actor at the Baltimore School for the Arts, so he wasn't completely green when it came to performing, but nobody in that room knew about his background at the time. What makes this story even more remarkable is that Money B, the person who was actually supposed to be there, got a quick thanks but no thanks, and was sent on his way. Meanwhile, Tupac's spontaneous audition impressed director Ernest Dickerson so much that he asked the rapper to stick around and read for a completely different character. That second audition would change everything, turning a casual tag-along into one of the most memorable performances in 1990s cinema. Fact 2. He secured Bishop by throwing furniture. When Tupac Shakur walked into that audition room to read for the role of Bishop, he didn't just impress the casting team with his acting skills, she literally threw a chair to seal the deal. This wasn't some planned theatrical move or a scripted part of the audition process, but rather a spontaneous burst of intensity that showed everyone in the room exactly what kind of raw energy he could bring to the character. Director Ernest Dickerson and the casting team had been struggling to find the right actor for Bishop, the film's volatile and unpredictable antagonist. Several well-known actors had already come through the door, including Daryl Mitchell, Anthony Treach, Chris from Naughty by Nature, and even Donald Faison, but none of them felt quite right for the role. The character of Bishop required someone who could tap into a deep, underlying rage while still maintaining an unsettling charisma that would make audiences both fear and understand him. When Tupac began his reading, something about the material or the character seemed to unlock something inside him. In the middle of his audition, he grabbed a chair and threw it across the room, demonstrating the kind of explosive unpredictability that Bishop would need. Rather than being alarmed or concerned about potential property damage, Dickerson immediately recognized that this was exactly the kind of intensity the role demanded. The chair-throwing moment became legendary among the cast and crew, with many people later saying that it was the exact second when everyone knew Tupac had nailed the part. Casting director Jockey Brown later described Tupac's performance as amazing, noting that he understood instinctively that Bishop's bravado and anger came from a place of deep pain. That physical outburst during the audition wasn't just showing off, it was Tupac demonstrating that he could access the emotional core of a character who would become one of cinema's most memorable villains. Fact 3. Studios wanted it as a comedy. Hollywood executives completely misunderstood what Juice was supposed to be when writers Ernest Dickerson and Gerard Brown first started shopping their script around town in the mid-1980s. Instead of recognizing the serious social commentary and intense psychological drama at the heart of the story, studio executives kept suggesting that the writers should lighten things up and turn their gritty crime thriller into a comedy. This wasn't just one or two executives making offhand comments. Multiple studios approached the project with the same tone-deaf suggestion. The script dealt with heavy themes like police harassment, gang violence, the struggles of urban youth, and the psychological transformation of a teenager who becomes increasingly violent and power-hungry. But somehow, various Hollywood decision-makers looked at this dark material and thought it would work better with laughs. At one point, the script was optioned by the Donner's Company, a production company that wanted to completely change the tone of the film. They seriously considered turning the entire project into a comedy, which would have transformed Bishop's terrifying descent into violence into some kind of lighthearted misadventure. The disconnect between what the writers had created and what the industry wanted to see was so significant. This kind of executive meddling wasn't uncommon in the 1980s, when Hollywood had very limited understanding of how to handle stories about Black urban life. Many studios simply didn't know how to market serious films about inner-city experiences, so their default response was often to suggest making everything more palatable through humor. The fact that Juice eventually got made as the intense, uncompromising thriller that Dickerson and Brown originally envisioned only happened because the success of other films like New Jack City and Boys and the Hood finally proved that audiences were hungry for authentic stories about urban America. Fact 4. The script sat on a shelf for 9 years. The screenplay for Juice was actually completed way back in 1984, which means it spent nearly a decade collecting dust before anyone was willing to turn it into a movie. Ernest Dickerson and Gerard Brown had written what they thought was a powerful story about friendship, violence, and urban life, but Hollywood wasn't ready for that kind of raw, uncompromising look at inner-city America. Dickerson, who was already making a name for himself as a cinematographer on Spike Lee's films, had originally intended Juice to be his breakthrough project as a writer-director team with Brown. They shopped the script around to various studios and production companies, but the response was consistently the same: too dark, too violent, too real. Industry executives kept telling them that audiences weren't interested in serious films about Black urban experiences, and many suggested that the material needed to be significantly softened or completely reimagined. Even Dickerson's own agent told him there was no way the movie would ever get made as written. The script literally sat on shelves for years while Dickerson continued his successful career as a cinematographer, working on films like Do the Right Thing and Malcolm X. During this time, the violence and social issues that the script addressed only got worse in real life, making the story even more relevant but apparently no more appealing to studio executives. Everything changed in 1991 when John Singleton's Boys and the Hood became a surprise hit, proving that audiences were actually hungry for authentic stories about urban life. Suddenly, Gerard Brown's new agent took one look at the Juice script and was amazed that it had never been produced. Within a short time, multiple studios were interested in the project, and a bidding war broke out for the distribution rights. The same script that had been deemed unmarketable for 9 years was now exactly what Hollywood wanted. Fact 5. Khalil Kain was nearly a decade older than his character. When Khalil Kain was cast as Raheem Porter in Juice, he was 27 years old and playing a character who was supposed to be a high school student. This created one of the most extreme age gaps between actor and character in the film, especially when you consider that his co-stars Omar Epps and Jermaine Hopkins were actually 17 and 18 years old respectively, meaning they were closer to the ages their characters were supposed to be. The age difference becomes even more striking when you realize that Kain was born in November of 1964, making him nearly a full decade older than some of his fellow cast members. Tupac Shakur, who played the film's main antagonist Bishop, was only 20 years old during filming, which means Kain could have theoretically been his older brother in real life, while they were playing characters who were supposed to be the same age and longtime friends. What's remarkable is that Kain pulled off the performance so convincingly that most viewers never questioned whether he looked too old to be hanging around with teenagers. His youthful appearance and natural chemistry with the younger actors helped sell the illusion that these four guys had grown up together in the same neighborhood. The casting directors were clearly more focused on finding actors who could embody the characters' personalities and relationships rather than worrying about exact age matches. This kind of age discrepancy wasn't uncommon in Hollywood films of the early 1990s. when casting directors often prioritized acting ability and screen presence over strict demographic accuracy. Kane's maturity and life experience may have actually helped him bring a sense of wisdom and stability to Raheem, who serves as the voice of reason among the four friends before tragedy strikes. The fact that he was significantly older than his character adds an interesting layer to his performance as the group's moral center. Fact 6. Tupac demanded everyone call him Bishop on set. Tupac Shakur took method acting to an extreme level during the filming of Juice by insisting that everyone on set call him Bishop instead of his real name, even when the cameras weren't rolling. This wasn't just a quirky actor preference or a way to help him remember his line. It was a deliberate choice to stay completely immersed in the mindset of his volatile and increasingly dangerous character throughout the entire production. The character of Bishop undergoes a dramatic transformation during the film, starting as just another teenager hanging out with his friends and gradually becoming a cold-blooded killer who terrorizes everyone around him. Rather than switching this intensity on and off between takes, Tupac chose to maintain that psychological state for weeks at a time. Cast and crew members later described how he would aggressively ask people to address him as Bishop, making it clear that he wasn't interested in casual conversation or friendly banter under his real name. This commitment to staying in character created a tense atmosphere on set that actually helped the other actors respond more authentically to Bishop's menacing presence. Omar Epps, who played Q, later talked about how Tupac's intensity between takes helped him tap into his own character's growing fear and desperation as Bishop became more unhinged. The method created a genuine sense of unease that translated directly onto the screen. According to his co-stars, Tupac's dedication to remaining in character was so complete that he would sometimes disappear from the set entirely when he got frustrated or angry, staying fully committed to Bishop's unpredictable and explosive personality. This wasn't just acting preparation, it was a total psychological immersion that blurred the lines between performance and reality. The approach was so effective that many people on the production began to see glimpses of Bishop's dangerous charisma in Tupac's off-screen behavior, creating an atmosphere that was both exciting and slightly unsettling. Fact 7. A prank fight nearly destroyed the production. What started as harmless joking around between co-stars nearly turned into a production nightmare when Jermaine Hopkins decided to play a prank on Tupac Shakur that backfired spectacularly. Hopkins, who played Steele in the film, thought it would be funny to mess with his fellow actor by telling him that he was being fired from the movie, but he seriously underestimated how Tupac would react to that kind of news. According to Hopkins himself, Tupac had been walking off the set frequently during filming, which was already creating some tension among the cast and crew. Hopkins saw an opportunity to get under his skin and decided to tell Tupac that the producers had decided to let him go because of his behavior. What Hopkins intended as a lighthearted prank immediately triggered something much more serious in Tupac, who took the fake news as a genuine threat to his breakthrough opportunity in Hollywood. Instead of laughing off the joke or getting mildly annoyed, Tupac's reaction was swift and physical. When he discovered that Hopkins had been lying to him, he started a real fight with his co-star, right there on the set. This wasn't just a brief scuffle or some heated wordsit, was an actual physical altercation that could have seriously injured one or both actors and potentially shut down the entire production. The incident highlighted just how much this role meant to Tupac and how seriously he was taking his first major acting opportunity. For someone who had spent years trying to make it in the entertainment industry, the thought of losing such an important role was apparently devastating enough to provoke a violent response. The fight also demonstrated the intensity that Tupac was bringing to the character of Bishop, which may have been bleeding over into his real-life interactions with his fellow cast members in ways that nobody had anticipated. Fact 8. Bishop magically has two identical guns. One of the most glaring continuity errors in Juice happens during the crucial scene where Bishop confronts his friends after the convenience store robbery, and it involves a case of mysteriously multiplying firearms. Throughout the scene, viewers can clearly see that Bishop has one revolver tucked into his jeans by his left hip, but when the confrontation with Raheem escalates, he somehow pulls out a second identical revolver from somewhere else on his body. The scene takes place in a brick courtyard where the four friends gather to argue about what happened during the robbery that went wrong. Bishop is determined to keep the gun despite his friends' suggestions that they should get rid of it, and the tension builds as Raheem challenges him about his decision. What makes this moment so visually confusing is that the grip of the first revolver remains clearly visible in Bishop's waistband throughout the entire argument, even as he pulls out what appears to be an identical second gun to threaten Raheem. This continuity mistake becomes even more obvious when you consider the sequence of events that led to this moment. The audience knows exactly how many guns were involved in the robbery and where they came from, so the sudden appearance of a twin revolver doesn't make any logical sense within the story. Some viewers have tried to explain this by suggesting that Bishop might have taken the store owner's gun during the robbery, but careful examination of the scene shows that both weapons are identical revolvers, which makes that theory unlikely. The error is particularly noticeable because the scene is so intense and important to the plot. This is the moment when Bishop shoots Raheem and fully transforms into the film's primary antagonist. Movie mistakes like this usually get caught during editing, but somehow this one made it all the way to the final cut, creating a moment that has puzzled eagle-eyed viewers for over 30 years. Fact 9. Tupac originally auditioned for the wrong role. When Tupac Shakur first walked into that casting office and asked to audition, he wasn't trying out for the role that would make him famous. He was actually reading for Q, the aspiring DJ character that eventually went to Omar Epps. This means that cinema history almost looked completely different, with Tupac potentially playing the film's sensitive protagonist instead of its terrifying antagonist. Director Ernest Dickerson was so impressed with Tupac's initial audition for Q that he immediately recognized the young rapper had serious acting talent, but something about the performance made him think Tupac might be even better suited for a different character entirely. After Tupac finished reading for Q, Dickerson made a decision that would change everything. He asked Tupac if he could stick around a little longer and try reading for another part. Dickerson handed Tupac some pages of dialogue for Bishop, the character he had been having the most trouble casting. This was the role that required someone who could be charming and likable at the beginning of the film, but gradually transform into someone genuinely frightening and unpredictable. The casting team had already seen several actors audition for Bishop, but none of them had quite captured the complex mix of charisma and menace that the character demanded. When Tupac read those Bishop scenes, everything clicked into place. He understood instinctively that the character's violence and aggression came from a deeper place of pain and frustration, and he was able to tap into that emotional core in a way that made Bishop feel real and human, rather than just a one-dimensional villain. By the time Tupac left that audition room, Dickerson knew immediately that they had found their Bishop, and the role that was originally meant for someone else became the performance that launched Tupac's acting career and created one of the most memorable characters in 1990s cinema. Fact 10. The director based rooftop scenes on his own childhood. The heart-pounding rooftop chase sequences in Juice weren't just the product of Hollywood imagination. Director Ernest Dickerson drew them directly from his own childhood experiences growing up in Newark, New Jersey. When Dickerson was writing the script with Gerard Brown, he reached back into his memories of actually jumping from rooftop to rooftop as a kid, turning those real-life adventures into some of the film's most thrilling and authentic moments. Dickerson grew up in an urban environment where jumping between buildings was just something kids did. Whether they were playing games, taking shortcuts, or sometimes trying to avoid trouble, the rooftops became an extension of the neighborhood playground, and Dickerson remembered the specific feeling of making those leaps, the adrenaline, the split-second calculations about distance and timing, and the very real danger of missing a jump and falling several stories to the ground below. When it came time to film those sequences, Dickerson's personal experience helped him create chase scenes that felt genuinely dangerous and realistic, rather than overly choreographed or fake. He knew exactly how someone would move across rooftops, which jumps were possible and which ones would be too risky, and how the geography of urban buildings creates natural obstacles and escape routes. This attention to detail came from having actually lived through similar situations rather than just imagining what they might look like. The climactic scenes where Q and Bishop chase each other across the Harlem rooftops become even more powerful when you realize that the director was essentially recreating moments from his own youth, just with much higher stakes. Dickerson's childhood experiences in Newark gave him the knowledge and confidence to stage these sequences in a way that captured both the physical reality and the emotional intensity of young people navigating dangerous urban environments where sometimes the only way out is up. Fact 11. Tupac was reportedly considered for Star Wars. One of the most surprising what-if stories in Hollywood history involves Tupac Shakur potentially wielding a lightsaber in the Star Wars universe, according to Rick Clifford, who worked as chief engineer at Death Row Records. Clifford claimed that George Lucas was actually eyeing Tupac for a Jedi role in what would become The Phantom Menace, which was released in 1999, 3 years after Tupac's death. According to Clifford's account, Tupac was genuinely excited about the possibility of joining the Star Wars saga, and had told the engineer that he was supposed to read for George Lucas and the casting team. Tupac apparently said he had 3 movies coming up, and one of them required him to audition for Lucas himself. Clifford remembered Tupac asking him to keep his fingers crossed, and expressing real enthusiasm about the opportunity to play a Jedi character. The connection between Tupac and the Star Wars project becomes even more interesting when you consider that Samuel L. Jackson, who had worked with Tupac on Juice, eventually landed the role of Mace Windu in the prequel trilogy. Lucas had reportedly asked Jackson to reach out to Tupac about auditioning for the part, but Tupac's tragic death in September of 1996 meant that he never got the chance to read for the role. If Clifford's story is accurate, it means that Tupac came incredibly close to becoming part of one of the biggest franchises in movie history, transitioning from his breakthrough performance in Juice to potentially becoming a Jedi Master in a galaxy far away. The timeline works out perfectly. Lucas began writing The Phantom Menace script in 1996, and the film's production would have required casting decisions right around the time when Tupac was building his acting resume and looking for bigger Hollywood opportunities. Fact 12. Future TV doctors had a brief school encounter. One of the most unexpectedly prophetic moments in Juice happens during a quick scene at school lockers, where Donald Faison approaches Omar Epps to have a brief conversation. At the time, this was just a small cameo appearance by Faison, who had auditioned for the role of Bishop but didn't get the part, so the filmmakers gave him a tiny role as a high school student instead. What makes this moment so interesting is that both actors would eventually become famous for playing doctors on 2 of television's most popular medical dramas. Donald Faison went on to star as Christopher Turk on the hit comedy series Scrubs, which ran from 2001 to 2010 and made him a household name as the lovable surgical intern and later attending surgeon. His character was known for his friendship with the show's main character and his enthusiastic, upbeat personality that provided much of the show's comedic energy throughout its 9-season run. Meanwhile, Omar Epps landed the role of Dr. Eric Foreman on House, the medical mystery drama that starred Hugh Laurie and ran from 2004 to 2012. Epps played a neurologist who worked on the diagnostic team led by the brilliant but difficult Dr. Gregory House, and his character was known for being serious, methodical, and often serving as the voice of reason among the team members. The brief interaction between these 2 future television doctors in Juice becomes a fun piece of trivia when you realize that their characters would eventually save lives in completely different ways, Faison through comedy and Hart on Scrubs, and Epps through intense medical detective work on House. Neither actor could have predicted that their quick encounter in a Harlem high school hallway would foreshadow their later careers as 2 of the most recognizable doctors on television during the 2000s. Fact 13. The film contains impossible gunfire math. During the climactic chase sequence in Juice, Bishop fires his revolver far more times than the weapon could actually hold, creating a glaring mathematical impossibility that breaks the laws of basic firearms mechanics. Standard revolvers typically hold 6 rounds in their cylinder, but Bishop manages to shoot well beyond that limit while running through buildings and across rooftops. never stopping to reload his weapon. The problem becomes most obvious during the intense final confrontation, where Bishop is chasing Q through a crowded party. He fires multiple shots in the elevator, continues shooting as he pursues Q through the building, and keeps pulling the trigger throughout the extended chase sequence. If you count up all the shots fired during these scenes, Bishop somehow manages to discharge far more than 6 bullets from what appears to be a standard 6-shot revolver. What makes this error particularly noticeable is that reloading a revolver while running at full speed would be virtually impossible for anyone, let alone someone in the middle of a high-stress chase. Revolvers require you to swing out the cylinder, eject the spent cartridges, insert new bullets, and close the cylinder again, a process that takes time and coordination even when you're standing still. There's simply no way Bishop could have performed this complex reloading procedure while sprinting across rooftops and through doorways. This type of mistake is surprisingly common in action movies, where filmmakers often prioritize dramatic tension over realistic ammunition limits. However, the error in Juice is especially noticeable because the film otherwise pays careful attention to the realities of urban violence and street life. The impossible gunfire math stands out as one of the few moments where the movie's commitment to authenticity breaks down in favor of maintaining the intensity of the chase sequence, creating a moment that has puzzled firearms-savvy viewers for over 30 years. Fact 14. 2 crew members were murdered during production. The end credits of Juice contain a heartbreaking dedication that most viewers probably don't notice or understand the full significance of when they see the words "for Janet and Tamu." These aren't just generic thank you messages or references to beloved family members. They're actually memorials to 2 people connected to the film's production who were murdered during or shortly after the making of the movie. Janet was director Ernest Dickerson's fiancée, someone who was personally close to the man creating this story about urban violence and its devastating consequences. The fact that Dickerson was dealing with the real-life murder of his own partner while directing a film about young people caught up in deadly situations adds a tragic layer of personal experience to the project that audiences never see on screen. Tamu was a production assistant who worked directly on the film, making her part of the Juice family in a very literal sense. She was murdered in Brooklyn after the film had moved into post-production, meaning that someone who had helped bring this story to life became a victim of the same kind of violence that the movie was trying to portray and understand. Her death occurred while the filmmakers were still putting the finishing touches on a project that dealt extensively with the impact of street violence on young lives. The dedication serves as a sobering reminder that the violence depicted in Juice wasn't just fictional dramate, was reflecting real dangers that were affecting people's lives every day, including people who were working on the film itself. For Dickerson, these weren't just random tragedies happening to strangers, but personal losses that occurred while he was in the middle of creating a movie about the very forces that had taken these 2 important people from his life. The dedication transforms the end credits from a routine list of names into a memorial for real victims of urban violence. Fact 15. Tupac made only $15,000 but splurged on jewelry. Despite delivering what would become one of the most memorable performances in 1990s cinema, Tupac Shakur earned just $15,000 for his breakout role as Bishop in Juice, a surprisingly modest paycheck for what turned out to be such an iconic character. The payment came in 2 separate checks, one for $9,000 and another for $6,000. According to people close to Tupac at the time, he made a very specific decision about how to spend his first major acting payday. Kendrick Wells, who worked as Tupac's friend and personal assistant, actually saw both checks and remembered exactly what happened after Tupac cashed them. Instead of putting the money toward rent, bills, or other practical expenses that a struggling young artist might prioritize, Tupac immediately went out and bought himself a collection of jewelry, either gold or silver pieces that represented his newfound success in Hollywood. This spending decision reflects something important about how Tupac viewed this breakthrough moment in his career. For someone who had been working hard to make it in the entertainment industry, that $15,000 represented more than just money. It was proof that he could succeed as an actor and validation that his talent was worth something in Hollywood. Buying jewelry with his first acting paycheck was a way of celebrating and marking this achievement, even if it wasn't the most financially responsible choice. The relatively small payment also shows how low-budget Juice really was, despite becoming such an influential film. $15,000 was actually considered good money for a newcomer in a small independent production, but it seems almost ridiculously modest when you consider how much Tupac's performance contributed to the film's lasting impact and cultural significance. His decision to immediately spend the money on jewelry, rather than saving it, demonstrates the confidence and optimism he felt about his future prospects in both music and acting.